Good afternoon,
Perfect.
everyone. Yeah, you're right. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, good. Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 10th Annual Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference. I am Jean Anderson with the South Central Library System, and I am stepping in for Jamie Motchik from the Wisconsin Valley Library Service as moderator of the Wellbeing Track. As I mentioned before, she is taking care of her well-being by taking care of her dog who is not feeling well and taking her to the vet. So assisting me today is Joy Schwartz from the Winnifox Library System, and we are very glad to have you here. Our presenter for this session is Amy Franco, Adult Department Director of the Glen Ellen Public Library, and she will be discussing coping with compassion fatigue. So Amy, whenever you are ready, go ahead and take it away.
Perfect. I just got a message that my screen sharing stopped. Okay, we're back. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I see that we have a really nice crowd here. My name is Amy Franco, and I work at the Glen Ellen Public Library, which is kind of a mid-sized suburban library right outside of the Chicago area. I am starting a new job in a few weeks, so I have my personal contact information on the last slide if you do want to contact me, because my email address will be changing. And I just want to mention that my pronouns are she, her, hers. So a bit of background about my library. We serve an increasingly diverse community of about 28,000 people with a budget just short of $5 million. I myself lead a department of about 15 people, serving everybody from high school age to beyond retirement, although we work really closely with our other departments as well, as I'm sure many of you do too. I oversee all print and digital collections, instruction, outreach services for adults and teens, and my day-to-day duties are kind of administrative, just kind of keeping the ship afloat, making sure everybody's happy on a day like today, making sure that they have donuts because they've come in to serve our, vibrant community. But what I really, really love to talk about personally and kind of professionally is helping people improve their organizational culture. It's a big interest of mine. And so I put this presentation together actually pre-pandemic, if you can believe it. And the pandemic has really forced us to talk about organizational culture. Of course, we know in every industry across the country, we're seeing people resign. They're not happy with how they're being treated at work. They're not happy with the decisions being made. And so I think that there's a lot that you can do at every level of an organization to try to improve that culture. So I will mention that if you have questions, please either put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A. Jean's going to help me keep track of your questions. Feel free to interrupt me at any time with your questions. We'll try to take those as we go, but we do have a lot to cover. So I'm going to be talking very quickly. And again, you are always welcome to contact me after the presentation with further questions. I also have a number of handouts. I'm going to drop that in the chat right now, so you can download those and ask questions, kind of see what's in there after the presentation. I want to say after the show. It's not really a show, is it? So I'm going to be using this little Menti icon here, so menti.com, and then there's a little code here, a little 8-digit code. It's 97051654, and you can answer a few questions that are going to come up later in the presentation. So to start out, we are going to be talking about what compassion fatigue is, the difference between compassion fatigue and ordinary stress, some risk factors for compassion fatigue, and some coping mechanisms. And again, we at my library are taught things like social work referrals, first aid, CPR, AED, mental health first aid. We also train our staff how to do Narcan, administer Narcan, and respond to opioid overdoses. These are all things that we never really thought we'd be doing when we went to library school or when we entered the profession in libraries. So you don't ever think of taking a job in a library to become a nurse or a social worker without the training. And, people in these other helping, healing professions, they talk about this and they have a really strong support network. And we're just not quite doing that yet in libraries. So I'm hoping that that will change. Standard disclaimer applies here. I'm a librarian. I'm not a mental health professional or a nurse or a social worker. It can be really tough to understand what you're going through. And if this is the first time that you've ever really thought about these things, you may have further questions that are better answered by a mental health professional or your doctor. And honestly, taking that first step, if this is all new to you, it's a really difficult first step. I'm a therapy lifer. I go Wednesday afternoons. I'm going right after this to my therapy session. So it's something that I think that we need to be talking about a lot more. So I'm here today to help you understand a few key topics that can hopefully help you identify and cope with what you may be feeling. I'm going to help you learn about compassion fatigue, identify the difference, as I mentioned, between compassion fatigue and stress, and a number of other factors. So, at my library, we've had some really strange challenges over the last 2 years. In addition to navigating a deadly pandemic, we are dealing with some minimum wage increases and a number of other factors that are all kind of piling on top of whatever you have going on outside of work. So I am going to take you back to your high school biology class. So it may be a little bit since you've thought about these things. We're going to talk about the basic physiological effects of stress on the body. And what we're really concerned about here are the two major stress hormones, which are adrenaline and cortisol. So adrenaline is the fight or flight hormone that allows you to battle a danger head on or escape to safety when you do sense danger. So if you've got persistently high levels of adrenaline from chronic stress, it can increase your risk for anxiety, depression, heart disease, and weight gain. It's also the chemical that gives you that little extra boost of energy in the face of danger. So if you've ever been cut off in traffic, or you've been startled by something and you get kind of shaky, or sometimes I get a little bit itchy, that's a surge of adrenaline in your body, and it's a physiological effect of stress. From an evolutionary standpoint, adrenaline is what allowed our prehistoric ancestors to fight or flee the saber-toothed tiger. So it's often called the fight, flight, or freeze hormone. And I will just mention that one time I was giving this presentation at a library staff training, and somebody reminded me that in the library world, we're not fleeing the saber-toothed tiger. We're helping them print tax forms or log into their Yahoo email for the first time. So we're often running toward that danger and things that are a little bit scary, because we're in a helping profession, and that's what we are trained to do. So cortisol, on the other hand, is also often called the stress hormone, and it's released during times of stress, which increases your heart rate, your blood pressure, your blood glucose, respiration rate, and muscle tension in response to stress. It also temporarily shuts down the body's functions, systems that aren't needed in the face of a crisis, such as digestion and reproduction. So if you're experiencing digestive or reproductive problems, problems with fertility, and you go to your doctor may say, well, you need to reduce your stress. And that is a really hard thing to understand how to do. But what they're saying is that you've got these chronically high levels of cortisol in your body that may be shutting down non-essential body functions. What your doctor is talking about is finding coping strategies for your stress to reduce the surge of these chemicals and restore blood flow to secondary body functions. It's also important to note here that we're nearly 2 years into a deadly pandemic, and high and sustained levels of cortisol in the blood also reduce your body's immune system, which is a non-essential body function when we talk about stress. So decreased immune function can make you more susceptible to the effects of the virus, and it can increase your recovery time. So it's really, really important that we talk about reducing our chronic stress. People who are under high levels of stress for long periods of time can also have a thinning of the prefrontal cortex, which is really essential for cognitive functioning. So the reason that teenagers are, sometimes impulsive, they sometimes don't think about, their actions, how their actions affect other people, it's because their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. So when you're constantly under high levels of stress and you have a thinning of the prefrontal cortex, it can really, really affect your decision-making process. So long-term effects of stress on the body include things like poor sleep, risk of depression and anxiety, anger or inability to control your emotions, impaired behavior and judgment, and hopelessness and loss of motivation. And the last thing that I'll mention here is that we tend to think of stress in the same way that we think about learning. So if you're going to learn a musical instrument, or you're going to learn a new skill, practice makes perfect, right? So you practice, 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 and the more you do it, the better you get at it. But stress doesn't work the same way. So the more stressed you are, the more you are kind of learning how to overcome these stressors at work, at home, whatever it is, the less and less able you're going to be able, the less you're not going to be able to fight off the effects of stress quite as effectively. So the more stressed you are, the more you're going to be forced to cope with stressful situations, the more worn down you're going to be. So some common stressors in libraries include all of the following, and I know none of this will be a surprise to you, but I think it's just helpful to mention it so that we know that we're on the same page. So things like budgetary concerns, staff turnover, Sick or absent coworkers. We're dealing with that a lot right now at my library. Ineffective managers or administrators. High workload. Your patrons sharing their personal problems with you. Upset or angry patrons. Stress or lots of activity at home. Working in areas where staff don't feel comfortable or qualified. Few breaks and long hours. Working in a high needs or under-resourced community. And new technology. So all of these things can lead to a risk of burnout, which includes things in libraries like lack of recognition, rewards, and opportunities to move forward, having little control over the work environment, high and increasing demands, not feeling treated fairly at work, not feeling supported at work or unfairly criticized, unclear or conflicting expectations, and a number of other things. So library staff, particularly our front-facing library staff, are assisting the most vulnerable patrons in our community. So they may be talking on a day-to-day basis with people who are experiencing homelessness, people who have a poorly controlled mental health issue, substance abuse issues, lack of resources, or some combination of these things. So assisting these patrons effectively requires that library staff do so with compassion. That is part of the job. And they also carry their own personal baggage into these interactions. So it could be that they've got a family member who is really dealing with a bad bout of COVID, or, I've got a coworker right now who is had a catalytic converter stolen from her car. And who knew catalytic converters are back ordered just like everything else. And so she doesn't have a car. It's been 3 months that she's been trying to get this part in, and she's bringing all of that to work. And then on top of it, we're dealing with all of these stressors at work. So it kind of just piles on top of each other. So let's work backwards to try to understand what compassion fatigue is. So compassion fatigue is characterized by emotional and physical exhaustion, leading to a diminished ability to empathize or feel compassion for others. It's sometimes referred to as secondary traumatic stress, and the two major components here are burnout and secondary trauma. Burnout is a state of emotional, mental, and often physical exhaustion brought on by prolonged or repeated stress, and it is not simply a result of working long hours. Burnout is characterized by cynicism, depression, lethargic behavior, and most often occurs when a person is not in control of how a job is carried out, either at work or at home, or if they were asked to complete tasks that conflict with their sense of self. So this really comes into play when staff members don't agree with management decisions. And sometimes there's a disconnect between these two groups of people. Burnout can also increase when someone is working toward a goal that doesn't resonate or when they lack support. There is a difference between plain stress and burnout, and it can be really difficult to know which one you're dealing with. And this is where a mental health professional can help you understand what you're feeling. You may need to take a step back and look at the overall picture of your work life as well. So if it's kind of short-lived or tied to a specific project, it's more likely to be kind of a typical stress response. But if it seems like you're never ready to face the day, or something has become just impossible to you at work, it feels like an achievement is just completely out of reach for you, it's much more likely to be burnout. So secondary trauma, on the other hand, is an indirect exposure to trauma through a firsthand account or narrative of the traumatic event. The vivid recounting of trauma by the survivor and the helper, followed by your subsequent memory of that event, may result in a set of interactions that parallel PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. In clinical settings, this is really controversial. Our mental health professionals don't always agree on whether this is an actual thing that's happening. If secondary trauma it should be primary trauma, or if you can really have secondary trauma. But I think that we can all agree that when you have a really difficult interaction at your circulation desk, at your reference desk, wherever it is that you work, it's very hard to walk away from that interaction and not take that stress with you. So if you're helping somebody, apply for, in Illinois, we have SNAP benefits, so Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and they tell you a really horrible story about all of the struggles that they're going with, it's hard to walk away from that and not take that with you. And that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about secondary trauma. So you're going to hear this multiple times today. The problem in our profession is that we do not have the appropriate or necessary support infrastructure to deal with secondary trauma and burnout. I'll mention also that mental health professionals, social workers, first responders, nurses, doctors, even lawyers receive training and support to prevent burnout and cope with secondary trauma. But we forget that library workers can be first responders too, and we need to be taking care of ourselves and each other. So compassion fatigue in the world of libraries is kind of an emerging topic. We're just starting to talk about it, but I'm going to urge you not to wait until it becomes a problem in our profession. We're losing a lot of people in all industries across the board who are burning out from their professions. And I'm really concerned that we're going to lose some really, really good library workers. So let's start talking about it so that we can find a solution and take preventive measures against it. So the last thing that I'll mention here is that I'm a big yoga person. I'm all about self-care. I go to therapy, I go to yoga, I do, try to do everything to try to be in the best mental state of mind that I possibly can be. So I was walking to my yoga class recently and I saw a yard sign that said, "Thank you, essential workers." And I thought to myself, that's really nice. Yeah, thank you. They've done a lot for us. So I went to yoga and then I walked back and I saw it again. And I thought to myself, you know what? I was back at work in May 2020, and I think that I'm an essential worker too. And so we have to be taking credit for things like that. And that's one of the coping strategies that you can use. It's just understanding that you're making the world a better place. So the impacts of compassion fatigue include a gradual desensitization to patron stories, a decrease in customer service quality, higher rates of depression and anxiety disorders among staff, and rising rates of stress leave and degradation in the workplace. Staff may also find that their ability to empathize and connect with their loved ones is impacted. So this isn't just something that's happening at work. You can bring it home too. In turn, this can lead to increased rates of stress in the household as well as social isolation. So this is the compassion, satisfaction, professional quality of life continuum. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later. So I think it's helpful to understand what the opposite end of the spectrum is. And compassion satisfaction is kind of what we're going for. That's like the opposite end of this continuum. So when you help people, you have direct contact with their lives. And as you may have found, your compassion for those you help can affect you in positive and negative ways. So compassion satisfaction is about the pleasure you derive from being able to do your work well. For example, if you feel like it's a pleasure to help others through your work, it may be something that drew you to the library world. It may be something that encourages you to stay in the library world. That may be an example of compassion satisfaction. You may feel positively about your colleagues and your ability to contribute to the work setting or even the greater good of society. So higher scores on the professional quality of life questionnaire, which again, we'll talk about in a little bit, they represent a greater satisfaction related to your ability to be an effective helper or healer. So I will say that just as not every interaction is going to leave you with this feeling of burnout, secondary trauma, not every interaction is going to give you a sense of compassion satisfaction. So we kind of have to find a good balance between these two things. So after understanding what compassion fatigue is, I think it's also helpful to talk about the stages of burnout. So it kind of depends on who you're talking to, like who you're reading, but we're going to go through 6 stages of burnout. So the first one is when you enter the field, you've got energy, enthusiasm, you're very idealistic. You're like, yes, I finally got my first library job. I love this. Or if you're like me, you worked at the mall for 10 years and you're like, oh my gosh, the patron is not always right. This is so great. So you're feeling really good. This is when you first enter the field. So stage 1, maybe some disappointment and fatigue. So you've got some work-related stress. You may be a little bit dissatisfied. You're starting to find out that maybe the job isn't as like idealistic as you thought it was. Or maybe you're experiencing a mismatch between the goals of your organization and your personal goals. You're maybe starting to experience some emotional distance from the public or a setback in personal priorities. So stage 2 is marked by frustration and indifference. So cynicism, some strained personal relationships. Often this comes from, a disagreement with a colleague, or if you have somebody who like goes to your boss and they ask you to get fired, we've all had that patron call us up and try to get us fired. This may be your feeling of frustration and indifference. So this will lead to stage 3, which is a sense of powerlessness and professional failure. And this is where it kind of starts to tip the scale. So you can have frustration and indifference, but then if you don't get the support that you need, maybe from your boss or from your board or whoever it is that you report to, you may not feel like you have a lot of agency to make change in your organization. So you may be experiencing a decreased competency in caring, alienation of your colleagues and the public, and you are not doing a really good job of coping emotionally. Stage 4 is isolation and apathy. So this is feelings of personal failure. You may be absent from work quite a bit. You may have a breakdown in your personal or professional relationships, and you're really starting to kind of withdraw from all of your support networks. And if none of these things are addressed, it will lead to stage 5, which is true burnout, marked by emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, no sense of personal accomplishment, and contemplation of leaving the job. So this is kind of where people are in the Great Recession or the Great Resignation. They get to this stage 5 and they're like, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm going to go find a job in a different field. And we're seeing that all over the place. But again, really concerned we're going to lose some good library workers. So let's talk a little bit about the warning signs for compassion fatigue, burnout, and workplace stress. And I just want to remind you at this point that it can be very difficult to understand if these are signs of compassion fatigue or something else like depression or anxiety. And again, I'm not a mental health professional, but someone with the proper training can help you identify and understand your signs and symptoms and help you find some ways to cope. So signs of compassion fatigue are, and these are going to be really tiny, so I'll read them out to you. Maybe. Signs. So feeling burdened by others' suffering, blaming others for your suffering, isolation, loss of pleasure in life, difficulty concentrating, insomnia, physical and mental fatigue, bottling up emotions, nightmares, feeling hopeless or powerless, frequent complaining about work or life, overeating and also undereating, excessive use of drugs or alcohol, poor self-care, and denial. And I do see that we have a question. Do people skip stages in burnout, move back and forth between stages? Absolutely. So this can be something where you jump, something really horrible happened and you jump to stage 4, or, you get to like stage 3 and you're kind of feeling, some of that stage 4 isolation and apathy, and then something really great happens and you might move backwards. So absolutely, you can move backwards and forwards in these stages of burnout. That's a great question. So according to the compassion fatigue awareness problem, denial on our signs and symptoms is one of the most detrimental symptoms because it prevents those who are experiencing compassion fatigue from accurately assessing how fatigued and stressed you actually are, which prevents them from seeking help. So to see where you fall on the compassion, satisfaction, and fatigue continuum, I'm going to urge you to take, we're going to talk about emotional labor in a little bit. I'm going to urge you to take the professional quality of life questionnaire. So these are 3 questions that I pulled. It's a 30-question questionnaire. So again, take your little cell phone, go to menti.com and enter this code. The first question is, and you're going to say yes, no, or you're not sure. I find it difficult to separate my personal life from my life as a helper. I think that I might have been affected by the traumatic stress of those I help. And I feel worn out because of my work as a helper. And I'm going to stop the share just momentarily so that we can go over to our survey results. Waiting for some screen sharing. Okay, perfect. So this is just a word cloud of what compassion fatigue might mean to you. I see a lot of exhaustion, burnout, underappreciated, overwhelmed, long-term tired, trauma. This is exactly what we're talking about. So thank you for putting your answers in here. And I will make this available at the end. I'll add it to that link where you can download the handouts. So let's see what the first answer is on our just abbreviated professional quality of life questionnaire. Oops. Oh, here we go. Okay, so the first question here is, I find it difficult to separate my personal life from my life as a helper. So I'll give you a few moments to answer this question. And we've got about 35 to 40 of you responding, and nearly half said yes. You find it difficult to separate your personal life from your life as a helper. So this tells me that you are taking a lot of baggage back and forth from work to home, and that can be a sign that you are starting to burn out. So let's go to the next one. I think that I might have been affected by the traumatic stress of the people I help. And again, somebody just wrote into the chat that they need the code. So it's menti.com and the code is 97051654. So almost 60% of you said yes. So this would be, you've got a stressful day, you had a really difficult time at your reference desk, and you're taking that feeling home with you. And our last question on here is, I feel worn out because of my work as a helper. And okay, so 3/4 of you said yes to this. So this is telling me that many of you may be experiencing some signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue, and you probably need to start making some changes in your home life, in your work life, to try to cope with this, because if you burn out, you're going to want to leave the field, and it's just not a good thing. So I do see that we've got a few chats. Let me just make sure that we didn't miss anything. We've got, okay, everybody in there. So keep answering. If you haven't had a chance to answer it, go ahead and enter it. I'm going to move on in the presentation. But like I said, I will upload the responses to this survey to the handout link so that you can get it at the end. And we've got about 130 people in this webinar right now, so we should have a pretty good sample size. I'm going to go back to screen sharing. Here we go. So if I can ask you to write into the chat, how many of you have worked in, this is emotional. We're going to go back to emotional labor. I'm sorry. A little bit out of order. I don't know how that happened, but write into the chat if you have ever worked in retail, customer service, or food service. And whether you know what I'm talking about, if you have ever heard the phrase, the customer is always right. Yeah, I hate that. The customer is never right, okay? Because they know that all they need to do is, make a threat and they get whatever they want. And in the library world, we don't tolerate that kind of behavior as much in the library world, but it's still really difficult to say no. We're in a profession where we always want to say yes. And sometimes that means putting your personal feelings aside for a moment. So working in a helping or healing capacity means that showing a genuine concern for customers' needs, smiling, making eye contact are all critical to a customer's perception of service quality. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about emotional labor. So when you face your angry patrons or people who are generally unpleasant, emotional labor can be particularly challenging. And a large part of that comes from the need to hide your real emotions. And can you continue to smile and nod? So you may be like, yes, I can help you get that book, while you scream at me, while your thought bubble is saying, oh my God, why did I even come to work today? So when you engage in emotional labor, you control your feelings to fulfill the goals and expectations of your organization. And from a practical standpoint, this means that you tend to either only express your positive feelings or hide or manage your negative feelings. And to deal with negative emotions, people tend to do one of the following. They either show emotion that they don't really feel. So when I worked at the mall, I had this kind of like bobblehead persona where I was like, yes, I can help you. Well, my thought bubble was like, I want to die. I don't want to be here. So showing emotion that they don't really feel, they hide an emotion that they do really feel, or they create an appropriate emotion for the situation. And you do this using 2 emotional labor techniques. So the first is surface acting. So this is when you fake an emotion or pretend to let the person know you are feeling a certain way by using an unnatural and artificial body language and verbal communication. So this is like I work at the mall and I'm a bobblehead persona. Smiling and using a soft tone of voice can help you show an emotion that you don't feel or hide an emotion that you do feel. And surface acting is what I call your customer service persona. So deep acting is when you control your internal emotions and direct them to believe that you actually are happy and enjoying the interaction with the other person. So rather than feel like you're pretending, you convince yourself that you're not experiencing a negative reaction. So deep acting is like fake it till you make it. So when people are habitually evoking the stress of surface acting, they'll tend to be more prone to depression and anxiety, decreased job performance, and burnout. And this has an effect on others too. So leaders who surface act at work are more likely to be abusive to their employees, for example, by micromanaging and invading their privacy. So surface acting can be brought out when there's a mismatch between your personality and what's expected from you at work. For example, if you're an introvert and you're on the front lines, which I know is none of us in this webinar right now. It can also be from a misalignment of values when you're being asked to do something that you don't believe in, or it can come from a workplace culture where you're not supported or you don't have the proper training. One of the ways that supervisors and administrators can support and train staff is by modeling what psychologists call display rules, which are norms or standards that workers learn through observation, instruction, feedback, and reinforcement. And one of the things that I wrote, or that I included in your handouts, is a link to a library, a nearby library in Illinois, who they have a script for how they want to deal with their difficult patron interactions. So you can type on the interaction that you're having, and it gives you a number of responses to that negative behavior. So this is kind of a formal example of display rules. We don't have anything like that at my library, but I'm often training staff things like, do you have a library related question? Or I'm sorry, I can't help you do that. I can't help you upload your, shirtless photo to Tinder, which is an actual thing that somebody helped me do one time. So when we train people to use these words and these phrases in these particular interactions, this is called display rules. So combining your display rules with company culture is really important. And some of the display rules that we see in libraries are things like setting up some boundaries. So do you have a library related question when somebody's asking you an inappropriate question or they're hitting on you or something like that? When you continually need to show only those emotions that are appropriate for the job, despite how you really feel, this can lead to an emotional conflict between your real emotions and those you show to others. So some researchers believe that emotional conflict like this leads to emotional exhaustion and burnout for workers, and that regularly hiding your emotions leads to high levels of stress and even a disconnect from close personal relationships. So some coping strategies for managing emotional labor include focusing on what you can control, identifying and chunking problems into manageable pieces, supporting each other, connecting your work to a higher purpose. If you're a religious person, maybe it's something like that. I'm not, so I like to think about why I'm in the job and what I enjoy about it. Focusing on things that you want to do rather than the things you have to do, and identify your triggers and preparing talking points for them. So I'm going to skip ahead. Again, very sorry, this was out of order. So the professional quality of life questionnaire is also one of your handouts, but we're going to move forward into some risk factors. So again, this can affect a wide range of professions and caregivers, and it tends to be common among professionals who regularly work in a helping or healing capacity. Therapists, for example, may experience compassion fatigue when the stories and experiences of people they meet in therapy start to affect their lives outside of work. Nurses, because empathy and compassion are demanded of them daily, may experience compassion fatigue when dealing with heavy workloads, excessive demands of patients, and long hours. And the American Bar Association says that even lawyers, especially those practicing in areas that require them to visit accident scenes, view graphic evidence, or deal with reports of trauma, have a high susceptibility to compassion fatigue. And again, because we're not really talking about this yet in libraries on a broad level, we have to look at other professions to try to understand things like risk factors. So we're going to look at therapists for this example. Several factors can put therapists at higher risk for developing compassion fatigue. And as I go through this, I'd like you to think about how this might look in a library, what this might look like in a library. So specializing in therapy that introduces them to extreme issues nearly every session. Being physically threatened by a person under their therapeutic care, a person under their care dying by suicide, providing therapeutic services to someone considered dangerous, working exclusively with people who experience depression or abuse, specializing in treating death, grief, or bereavement, and providing therapy for someone who has experienced the death of a child or who has a dying child. So in librarianship, as in some other professions such as nursing, there's a growing awareness that this caregiving is a form of work layered on top of other job responsibilities. And these are other examples of emotional labor. And when library workers are overworked and drained from dealing with others' needs and not having time for their own, it can lead to compassion fatigue. And I'll just mention here that research has also shown that that people who work at higher poverty schools, there's a greater incidence of compassion fatigue among teachers. And also women, trans, and non-binary folks are more susceptible to compassion fatigue, as are people who have experienced trauma in their own lives. So that's all of the negative part. And now we're going to talk about some coping strategies. So some coping strategies for dealing with compassion fatigue or burnout tend to fall into 4 categories. And the first one is professional strategies. So these include things like balancing your workload, accessible supervision, and taking positive action to change your environment. The second one includes organizational strategies, which include things like sufficient release time and safe physical space. So right now we've got some boundaries set up. You may have some plexiglass. You're wearing a face covering every day when you go to work. These are examples of safe physical space during a global pandemic. Other safe physical space includes things like locked doors, offices that aren't in view of the public, just having some boundaries as much as possible. Number 3 is personal coping strategies. So these are the ones that you have the most control over. Personal strategies include respecting your limits and maintaining time for self-care activities. So having a sense of purpose, recognizing your impact on others, and understanding that you're making the world a better place can all contribute to. The personal coping strategy that is most effective is boundary setting. And it's also the one that is most difficult, especially in the world of libraries, where we always try to say yes, we bend over backwards, we are just putting ourselves last all the time. So you need to find a way to say what works for you and what doesn't, and it's very difficult. So you can say things like, no, not today, sorry, I can't. It doesn't always come easily, but you have to figure out a way to say that. Recognizing when you've been stretched too far and getting your priorities straight and calmly communicating your needs can be an empowering weapon against burnout. Other personal coping strategies you can think about are taking what's stock on your plate and having a transition from work to home. So I work from home on Wednesdays. I'm at my home right now, and sometimes it's really difficult because my commute is from like my bedroom to my kitchen to my dining room where I usually work. So sometimes I try to just do something to break up the day a little bit. So I might do a little bit of yoga in the morning. I might go for a walk, not on a day like today because it's freezing, just so that I have a little bit of separation between work and home. And the last coping strategy is general coping strategies. And these are the ones that we tend to identify when we think of self-care rituals. They include self-nurturing and seeking connection. I would also encourage you at this point to enhance your awareness with education, which you're all doing by participating in this session today, exchanging information and feelings with people who can validate you, being kind to yourself, and expressing what you need verbally. Many people find that starting a self-idea collection, finding time for yourself every day, and rebalancing your workload are effective tools for fighting off the feelings of burnout. You may also want to consider asking for help at work or at home, assessing your trauma input, learning about compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma. Consider joining a peer support group or starting one of your own if you don't have one at your work. Attending workshops and professional training regularly and exercise can help to regulate your mood. So if you have some personal coping strategies or some general coping strategies, drop them in the chat. I'd love to see what works for you. Questions to ask yourself about your coping strategies are things like, what are my goals? How much time am I spending on my email? How do I feel on Sunday night with work approaching? Is there someone at work I'm trying to avoid, such as a patron or a coworker? Do I feel guilty for taking time off? How am I sleeping or eating? Have I communicated my feelings to my supervisor about stressful situations? You have to talk about it. Do I have people I can freely talk to about my stress? And what are my self-care strategies? And one strategy I want to mention, did somebody say Wordle? It's definitely one of mine. One strategy I want to mention specifically is focusing on your empathy. So empathy is shown through emotionally connecting with another person, withholding judgment, and giving them space to feel. It's the ability to imagine yourself in the other person's situation, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you can just say that you understand exactly how they're feeling. Empathy is different from sympathy, which is feeling sorry for someone else. So when you listen empathetically, you strengthen the rapport between yourself and the other person. And some core aspects of empathetic listening are being fully present, so actually listening and not making assumptions about what the person is saying, and allowing the person you're helping to do most of the talking without interrupting or relating the situation to your own experiences. And I know that this is really hard in our world because we're always trying to fix things. So sometimes when I talk to my librarian friends, my library worker friends, they're not always the most supportive because they're always like, why don't you try this? Or why didn't you do this? Or you should have done this. And sometimes we just need a space to vent. We just need to, kind of make that space for each other. You just got to get it off your chest, have some catharsis, and then pick yourself up and move on. And we really have to remember to try to do that as much as possible. And if you don't have somebody in your life that you can talk to like that, that would be a time to explore whether you need to see a mental health professional, even just to kind of vent once a month. Empathy for others also helps you do your job, and it's also important to take good care of your feelings and thoughts by monitoring how you use them. So the most resilient workers are the ones who know how to turn their feelings to work mode when they go on duty and turn them off when they go off duty. And this is not denial. It's a coping strategy, an example of healthy boundary setting. It's also a way to get maximum protection while working and maximum support while resting. I want to also mention at this point that if you have a diagnosable mental health challenge, or a mental health illness, you may be eligible for reasonable accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act. An HR professional, a manager, or a mental health professional can help you understand what your rights are. And some examples of reasonable accommodations in the workspace for mental health illnesses may include things like alternative workspaces if you're really distracted, some headphones, which I found out recently a lot of libraries don't allow even in off-desk time, which seems unreasonable to me. Additional breaks. Breaks really help you structure your workday, and breaking up your work into manageable chunks is a really effective way of staying on task. We can really only focus for about 45 to 50 minutes at a time. So taking a 5 to 10 minute break to change topics or get up and do a little bit of walking around will help you understand what's happening in your building, but it'll also give you that break from work as well. And a sound barrier. If you work in an area that's accessible to patrons, even when you're supposed to be off desk, you may need to discuss more of a physical barrier. So let's talk a little bit more about setting boundaries. Setting boundaries. Okay. So you need to be able to say no. Oh, we're going here. Okay. Saying no. So when we keep saying yes, we no longer have time to do the things that we want to do. And instead, we end up doing the things that other people want us to do. And an important act of self-care is standing up for your energy and time when other people are asking too much of you. This means listening to your inner voice, putting your needs first, and being firm in your decision to say no. Identifying your top priorities. So when you define what's actually important to you, it becomes easier to focus on what matters. Often we spend our time on things that aren't always productive, which means we run out of time to practice self-care. Once you've defined your top priorities, you'll be able to schedule your time more easily around it. Practice self-reflection. So self-reflection can help you make sense of your emotions, understand yourself more, and uncover ways to deal with situations instead of letting them consume you. Try to find a time to reflect a few times per week by writing something down, writing down what's on your mind or what's happening in your life. Focusing on your basic needs. Sometimes self-care is a lot simpler than what we make it out to be. When we get to the root of it, self-care is just making sure that you take care of yourself so that you can be the healthiest version of yourself, mind, body, and soul. So if you're feeling really stressed out, you need to ask yourself if you're getting enough sleep, if you're eating a balanced diet, and if you're moving your body. And if the answer is no to any of these things, focus on improving those first before jumping into an elaborate self-care ritual. Finding a space to vent. No matter how much you try to keep a positive mindset, there's always going to be times that you need to vent. No one's going to be positive 100% of the time, and you shouldn't feel bad for needing to complain or vent. Just find a place where you can do it without being harmful to others or without frustrating anybody else. So for some people, that's journaling, writing a blog post, calling a friend, going for a run, or doing something destructive. One thing that I really love to do to vent is breaking down cardboard boxes. I don't know why. It's just it's really cathartic to me. Some people like to pop bubble wrap. Some people like to go to the gym and hit a punching bag. But for me, it's breaking down cardboard boxes. So whatever it is that you need to do. Creating more stability. Lack of structure can make us feel unmotivated and distracted and often leads to doing everything at the last minute. If we can prevent this, we can reduce a lot of unnecessary stress. Flexibility is important, but structure is necessary for creating a sense of stability and balance. When you create stability and structure in your schedule, you can actually make time for self-care. If you're struggling with this at work, ask your supervisor to help you prioritize your tasks and set soft deadlines so you can stay on track. Limit your screen time, which we're not doing today. Roll your eyes if you have to. I know that this is one that we talk about, with parents and other people all the time, but we're hearing a lot about the detrimental effects of social media, especially on young children. And we're all aware of the blue light phenomenon that affects your sleep quality. So there's nothing wrong with using your phone in moderation, but when you're glued to it 24/7, you waste a lot of time that could be spent on self-care. And especially if you find that you're like doom scrolling. Usually I try to set a timer when I find that I'm doom scrolling. I'll tell Siri to set a 5-minute timer so that I can get my doom scrolling done. And then when the timer goes off, I got to change tasks. So make a conscious effort to try not to let your phone take up so much space in your life. Get into a routine. Your morning routine sets the tone for the day. If you're constantly rushing to get out the door, your day is going to feel rushed. If you overextend with personal commitments after work, it can be difficult to prioritize self-care. So you have to find something that works for you. Feel your feelings. Most of us have a tendency to overanalyze our feelings because they don't always make sense. If we're constantly trying to come up with a reason for our feelings, we deny ourselves the experience to just feel and connect with our inner selves. Instead, I would challenge you to give yourself permission to feel happy, sad, or whatever it is that you're feeling without trying to analyze or eliminate your feelings. So seek to understand without judgment or attachment. And the last one is rest. When was the last time that you did absolutely nothing? And I'm not talking about streaming your favorite TV show or, reading a book or doing yoga. I'm talking about absolutely nothing. I know firsthand how difficult this is because I can't sit still. I'm like constantly on the go and my mind is like a stock ticker. I talk really fast. I move really fast. And so it's really, really difficult for me to just slow down and rest. And it's really hard to do that and not feel like I'm being lazy or unproductive. And I will just mention that true relaxation is so important for your well-being. So you have to make it a priority to unwind properly. So I know that we are getting close to the end of our session, so I'm going to skip ahead for a few things, but these strategies a lot of times depend significantly on the support of a supervisor and require a supportive work culture. So if you don't feel like you can take these steps, you need to improve your work culture, and that's another session for another day. But if you're a supervisor, listen up right now. Supervisors can walk around the building to check in on staff and how they're doing, suggest staff take mini breaks throughout the day to get fresh air, engage in team huddles, empower staff to start their own support groups, ensure that they have opportunities for learning inside and outside of the work setting. And I will say here that feeling competent reduces stress, give staff the tools and resources they need to do their jobs, and celebrate individual and collective successes. So if you are a supervisor, here are some questions that you need to ask yourself. Am I sending or answering emails to employees at odd hours of the day? Do I stay calm in the face of stress? Am I taking time off? Are my expectations of staff realistic? Could some of my employees' stress be due to my behavior? What is going on in my employees' lives that is causing them stress? How am I regularly recognizing and praising my employees' work? And have I created clear and reasonable norms and boundaries on communication, technology, and other behaviors? And the last thing I'll say here is you need to make it okay for your staff to take a mental health day, and then you need to talk about it. So don't make them lie to you. Everybody takes a mental health day when they need it. And if they don't feel comfortable talking to you about it, they'll say things like, I'm really not feeling well today. I have a headache. That's one of my favorites. When somebody tells me that they have a headache, I'm like, all right, that's a mental health day and we need to talk about it. So don't make them lie to you when they need a break from a stressful job. In libraries, we talk a lot about the mental and emotional well-being of our patrons, and I would challenge you to do the same for your staff. Question came in, we may be encouraged to feel our feelings, but not while we were at work. I feel like keeping an even tone and not rocking the boat is valued and looked for in an employee. Yeah, absolutely. So when you're on a service desk, you really want to, make sure that you're calm, cool, collected. But it could be that, off desk, you need a little bit of time to vent and you need to be bonding with your coworkers. That's an important part of the staffing cycle as well. So this is called a wellness wheel. This is 8 dimensions of wellness, and it refers to our complete health rather than just your physical or mental health. So working toward them in one way or another is a great goal because wellness relates directly to the quality of a person's life. So emotional, occupational wellness, intellectual wellness, these should all be really clear to you. Environmental wellness may be, reducing substance use, reducing our, access to, if you're watching a lot of news that is really scary, things like that. Financial wellness, this is something where you're working toward a financial goal and you're saving for, maybe a vacation or something like that. And when you finally get to take it, you may experience some other dimension of wellness. We've got social wellness, which is making sure that you have the support you need and interact with others, which is an essential part of the human experience, physical wellness and spiritual wellness. So we've got about 10 minutes, and I know that you probably have some questions, so I'm going to skip this case study. I can upload it to the handouts. We're also going to skip the 4-minute guided meditation that's already in your handouts. It's a really good one to just do at your desk. It's 4 minutes. You just close your eyes. It's some deep breathing. If you've never done it before, if you've never done any guided meditation, it can feel really silly. You feel like everybody's watching you, but in reality, if you close your eyes for 4 minutes at your desk, is anybody really going to notice? And do some deep breathing? It can be a really effective way to ground yourself. Go for a walk, do something to just break up the day. So at this point, we've got about 9 minutes for questions. I will put the link to the handouts in the chat again. Feel free to download those, check them later in the day, and I will upload our survey results and a few other things so that you have everything. You're, of course, welcome to contact me. My GEPL email address is only going to be active for a few more weeks, so contact me at my Gmail. This is my work phone, so unless you really need to talk to me in the next few days, I may not be able to get back to you, but if you send me an email, I would love to talk to you and hear any feedback. So please feel free to write in with your questions at this point, and we do have one.
Mm-hmm. And then there was a couple of chats as well.
Oh, okay, good.
Yes, about one, Sarah said that if you have the ability to create a quiet break room for staff, I found that to be a lifesaver. Just 5 minutes to be alone, to do a few yoga poses, etc., works wonders.
Yeah, so we did this recently. In Illinois, we have a law that anytime you are updating a building or building a new building, you have to include space for people who need a private place to breastfeed, so a lactation room. And we call our lactation room the room of requirement because currently we don't have anybody who's breastfeeding. So that is the room for whatever you need it to be. It's not quite big enough to do an elaborate yoga routine, but there's a comfy chair in there and it's quiet. It's got a lock on the door and you can go in there if you need just some time away from everything else.
Excellent. And then Rebecca asks, do you have any examples of activities for positive bonding that might be done at a staff meeting?
Rebecca, right? Rebecca, send me an
Yes.
email, Rebecca, because not off the top of my head, but I can definitely help you do some research. I think it's really going to depend on what your staff culture is. So if you are already a staff that's really tight knit and you get along really well, that might look a little bit different than if you have a more formal relationship with your coworkers. So send me an email. I'd love to talk to you about it and we can kind of work on it together.
Thank you. And then another question, similar question, could you suggest some ways for staff training to present mental health /wellness?
Well, you can start talking about, compassion fatigue. I've done this training at probably over a dozen library in-service days. So I'd be happy to come to your library, either virtually or in person. I'm putting together with a couple of other library administrators right now, a presentation called Building a Trauma-Informed Workforce. I think you need to be, doing some research on that. You might have, a local NAMI chapter, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We have one in DuPage County where I work that has a speakers bureau. You can reach out to, we've got, a therapist who has come in and done some training for us. She helped me put this presentation together, in fact. So it's really going to depend on what you have in your community. Reach out to NAMI and see what they say. If you have a local chapter, if you don't, you probably have a statewide chapter and they can suggest some resources for you too.
Great. Thank you. I had forgotten about NAMI, and I didn't know they had a speakers bureau. So
They
that's
do, yeah,
a
and they're
good
really
resource.
good. They're really good, and they in my area, DuPage County, they do it for free. They don't even charge for it.
Wow. Okay. I will look, Joy, if you would you look for the link for NAMI Wisconsin to see if they have something similar and put that in the chat. And then I think I got all the questions. I'm just going to scroll through the chat for just a second to make sure that I got everything. One of the things I hear a question or a comment. One of the things that I think needs to be discussed a bit is the death of favorite patrons. I work in nursing homes, and this happens to me often.
Yeah, Maureen, I don't have a good answer for that, but it's, anytime we have a loss, it's really, really difficult. And, I will say also that, a loss isn't always a death. I mean, it could be somebody moving away. It could be you didn't reach a goal that you wanted to achieve. It could be a number of things. And, being able to grieve that loss is really, really important. So, I don't have a great answer for you, but you need to get some closure and you need to make space for yourself to grieve.
Thank you. Yes, and another comment that they just had a loss of a longtime patron, volunteer library supporter.
Yeah, that's really tough. That's really, really tough.
Yes, and Donna says it may help to focus on the good things you brought to their life or on a happy memory you had with the patron. So thank you for sharing that, Donna. So I'm
about 4 more minutes if we have any other questions or comments.
And Joy did find the Wisconsin Speakers Bureau for NAMI. So thank you, Joy, for putting that in the chat.
Yeah, I would say, contact them now if you want to bring them in sometime in the future, start establishing their relationship. In my area, they are swamped right now. Can't imagine why. So it's helpful to kind of have that connection already in place for when you're planning your in-service day.
Yes. We'll give it just another minute for any last questions to come in. Oh, whoops. I feel here a question for you. I feel like we do a lot of talking about how important mental health is, but not a lot of putting those thoughts into action. Do you have ideas about how we can build support into organizational infrastructure?
Yeah, so that would be, let me go back in the presentation here. That would be a lot of the organizational coping strategies. So on this page right here, and some of the organizational strategies, let me just scroll through my notes here. Tying your organization values to your strategic plan is something that can be really important, because your strategic plan is kind of what sets the guidelines for your mission, vision, and values. And you have to have people who believe in that. And if you have a lot of staff members who, maybe don't believe in your strategic plan, or they kind of feel burnt out by it, it could be just like a stressful factor. So I'm scrolling through my notes here. Of course, I didn't number them. But organizational strategies are things like sufficient release time, safe physical space. We talked a little bit about boundaries, so making sure that you're balancing your workload, accessible supervision, taking positive action to change your environment. So if you're not meeting regularly with your staff, that can be, a really good first step to start improving your organizational culture. But a lot of times if you just ask people what's not working for you, I'm reading a lot right now about the stay interview. So asking people, what's working for you and what's not working for you. And you have to, as a supervisor, you have to, when you get that if you're able to get that candid feedback, you can't take it personally, which can be really, really difficult. So you have to just write it down, express your gratitude for whatever feedback you get, and then take the feedback and try to do something about it. And I saw somebody say something about a filter to make my eyes. I just have, I don't know, I have really big eyes. I am using the Zoom, clean up your appearance filter on Zoom. So maybe it's not all me. but thank you. That's lovely.
Thank you. And I think that is, it's all the questions I'm seeing that have come in so far, and we are just about at 2:00. So I will just remind everyone that we did record today's session. It will be available. I think Jamie has a goal of having it up by Monday. And let me get to my notes for the for finishing up today. So thank you so much, Amy, for a great session. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, send me an email if you've got questions. I'd love to talk to you.
All right, thank you. There will be
Bye.
a short survey at the end of the webinar, and it will be sent to your email as well. We appreciate your feedback. Our next session in this track is Honoring Resilience with Tanea Winder, I'm not sure how to say her name, and begins at 2:30 Central Time. Or you can join Welcome Aboard, Planning for New Employee Success with Emily Rogers in the management track. We hope to see you there. And if not, we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. All right.